You are being manipulated right now, not yesterday, not last week, but in this very moment. And the most dangerous thing about it is that you do not even notice it. Because if manipulation looked obvious, if it felt like pressure or control, you would reject it immediately. You would question it. You would distance yourself. But that is not how it works. Real psychological influence does not feel aggressive. It feels like a normal conversation, like a connection, like someone simply understands you. And that is exactly why it is so effective, because you do not defend yourself against what feels natural. You do not protect yourself from what feels familiar. And you certainly do not expect that the person who makes you feel comfortable could at the same time slowly shape the way you think. Think of a moment when you changed your mind, not because you deeply researched or analyzed something, but simply because of a conversation, because of the way someone said something, because of how it affected your feelings. And you did not even notice how your position shifted. You simply accepted it as your own thought. And that is exactly how influence works. It does not force you. It leads you quietly, gradually, step by step, until your thoughts begin to feel like your own, even if they are not. And once something starts to feel like your idea, you stop resisting it. Most people think manipulation is something complex, something that requires high intelligence or malicious intent. But the truth is much simpler, and at the same time more uncomfortable. People use psychological tactics every day without even thinking about it. In conversations, in friendships, in relationships, even in ordinary everyday situations, they repeat what works, notice what gets a reaction, adapt to your behavior, and over time these patterns become automatic. So automatic that it no longer looks like manipulation. It looks like personality, like confidence, like a communication style, like that is just how this person is. But the effect remains the same. Your attention changes, your emotions change, your perception changes. And when perception changes, everything else changes too. And here is what matters most. Influence does not begin with control. It begins with attention, because where your attention goes, your experience follows. If your attention is on a person, you begin reacting to them. If your attention is on their approval, you begin seeking it. If your attention is on their behavior, you begin adjusting your own. And this is where the shift begins. Not when something is taken from you, but when your focus slowly moves away from yourself and on to someone else. And the scariest part is that during this, you do not feel anything bad. You do not feel controlled. You feel engaged. You do not feel influenced. You feel connected. You do not feel manipulated. You feel understood. And that is exactly why you lower your guard without even realizing it. You open up faster, trust sooner, share things you would normally keep to yourself, and once that happens, influence becomes easy. Because now it is not about forcing you, it is about directing what is already there. You begin noticing small changes, thinking about that person more often than usual, replaying conversations in your mind, paying attention to their tone, their reactions, their mood. And without realizing it, your emotional state begins to depend on how they behave. If they are warm, you feel good. If they are distant, something feels wrong, and you cannot fully explain why, but you feel it. And it is not random. It is conditioning. It is your brain learning to respond to their behavior. And then, something even more subtle happens. You begin changing yourself, not because you were forced, not because someone told you to, but because inside you a desire appears to preserve that state, avoid tension, maintain the connection, and you begin thinking before speaking, softening your thoughts, holding back certain reactions, filtering your words, and over time you become more careful, thinking more about their reaction than your own. And this is where the real change begins. because now you are not simply being yourself. You begin managing how you are perceived. You adapt to the possible reaction of the other person, and the more you do this, the easier it becomes to influence you. And the most dangerous part is that it does not feel like losing control. It feels like protecting something important. This connection, this closeness, this feeling of being understood. And that is why you adapt, become more flexible, more attentive, more focused on the other person than on yourself. And gradually your focus shifts from your thoughts, your emotions, your boundaries, to theirs, to what they think, what they feel, how they might react. And this is where your power begins to disappear. Not because it was taken from you, but because you stop being at the center of your own attention. And the more this happens, the harder it becomes to see what is really going on, because you are already inside the process. You react instead of analyzing, you feel instead of questioning. And it is exactly in this state that these things work best, where everything seems normal, where nothing looks obviously wrong, but something still feels slightly off. And most people ignore that feeling because it is not clear, not logical. Because on the outside, everything looks normal and they move on. But that feeling does not disappear. It stays quietly in the background. And over time, those small moments begin to connect, forming patterns. And those patterns begin to change the way you think, the way you feel, the way you react. And when your feelings change, your decisions change. When your decisions change, your behavior changes. And when your behavior changes, something deeper begins to change. Your identity, the way you see yourself, the way you trust yourself, the way you perceive reality. And by the time you notice it, if you notice it at all, you no longer react the way you used to. You become more careful, more dependent on the reactions of others. And that is the real goal, not to directly control your actions, but to gradually change the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you see yourself, without ever letting you realize when it began. So, before we move on to the actual tactics, you need to understand one important thing. This is not about fear, and it is not about paranoia. It is about awareness, because the moment you begin to see these patterns, you do not become weaker. You become harder to influence. You begin noticing not only words, but tone, timing, behavior, and reactions. And that is what changes everything, because now you are not just a participant in the interaction, you are an observer. You choose how to respond instead of simply reacting automatically. And that is the difference between being under influence and being aware of influence. And now that you understand this, you are ready to see what most people never even notice. The psychological tactics people use every day to influence you, even if you do not realize it. Now that you understand how easily your thinking can be influenced, even when you do not notice it, it is time to look at the actual tactics, the same ones people use every day, not only manipulators or toxic personalities, but ordinary people in ordinary conversations, in friendships, in relationships. And that is what makes it even more dangerous, because these things do not look like manipulation. They look natural. They are woven so organically into everyday communication that you do not question them. You participate in them, and the more you participate, the more they shape you. The first tactic is emotional anchoring, and it is one of the most powerful ways of influencing without any direct pressure. Because instead of controlling your actions, a person links themselves to a certain emotional state inside you. For example, they appear exactly when you feel bad. They support you, listen to you, give you attention at the very moment you need it most. And over time, your brain begins to create a connection between that person and the feeling of relief, comfort, and safety. And the next time you feel those same emotions, your mind automatically reaches for them, not because you consciously decided to, but because that link has already been formed. And the strongest part is that they do not even need to ask for your attention. You give it to them yourself. And that is how attachment is formed, quietly, effortlessly, without pressure. The second tactic is selective attention, and here influence becomes more strategic, because instead of changing reality completely, the person simply controls what you look at. They emphasize certain details and ignore others. They highlight your mistakes but minimize their own. They take one of your reactions and present it as your entire personality. And over time, that repetition begins to shape the way you see yourself, because the brain does not need the full truth in order to believe something. It only needs a constant signal. And if something is repeated often enough, it starts to feel like reality, even if it is incomplete or distorted. The third tactic is controlled validation, and it is incredibly powerful because it directly targets your need for approval instead of giving stable support. The person gives it unevenly, in small, unpredictable portions. One moment they praise you, make you feel important, valuable, noticed, and in the next moment they become colder or neutral. And this instability creates inner tension because your brain begins searching for what changed, what you did wrong, how to get that positive reaction back. And without even realizing it, you begin adjusting your behavior, your words, your tone, just to receive that approval again. And over time, you no longer act from yourself, but from their reaction. The fourth tactic is strategic silence, and it is deeply underestimated because it seems like just an absence of words. But in reality, it is one of the strongest psychological tools. When someone pauses before replying, ignores messages, or suddenly disappears from a conversation, it creates tension because your brain cannot tolerate uncertainty. It immediately begins filling in that empty space. You start thinking, analyzing, replaying the situation, questioning your words and actions, and in that moment, all of your attention becomes concentrated on them. And that is where control appears, not through words, but through silence. The fifth tactic is framing, and it is one of the strongest ways to change how you see reality, because it is not about what is said, but how it is presented. The exact same situation can be described in completely different ways, and each version will create a different emotional reaction. For example, instead of, "I made a mistake," a person says, "You misunderstood me." The facts are the same, but the responsibility is already different. And if this repeats, it gradually changes your perception of situations. The sixth tactic is unpredictability, and this is exactly what creates emotional dependency. Because when a person is stable, you feel calm, you understand them, you know what to expect. But when they change, when today they are warm and tomorrow they are cold, it creates tension. And that tension keeps you in the process because your brain begins trying to understand what is happening, predict their behavior, restore stability. And the more you do this, the more you focus on them. The seventh tactic is emotional invalidation. This is when a person gradually reduces the significance of your feelings. They say, "You are overreacting. You are too sensitive. It is not that serious." And at first it may sound like help, but over time it destroys your trust in yourself. You begin doubting your reactions, filtering your emotions, and eventually you trust their evaluation more than your own. The eighth tactic is redirection. This is when the conversation never stays on the main issue. You bring up something important, but the focus immediately shifts. Maybe they mention something from your past. Maybe they criticize your tone instead of the point. And suddenly you are defending yourself, explaining yourself instead of discussing the problem. And that is how the problem never gets resolved. The ninth tactic is information control. And this is not about complete concealment, but about rationing. The person gives you just enough information to keep you interested, but not enough to make you feel secure. and that creates an inner need to know more. You come back, ask questions, search for answers, and that is how dependency is formed. And the 10th tactic is psychological mirroring, and it goes much deeper than simple copying. It is a reflection of your identity. The person adapts to your values, beliefs, way of thinking, and you feel like you have found someone like you, and that creates instant trust. But along with that, you lower your guard, become more open, and more vulnerable to influence. And here is what makes all of this so powerful. It does not look like manipulation. It looks like normal behavior. And that is exactly why it works, because you do not resist it. You participate in it. And the more you participate, the more it shapes you, your attention, your emotions, your thinking, and your decisions. But the moment you begin noticing it, everything changes. You stop reacting automatically. You begin observing, seeing patterns instead of isolated moments. And that awareness creates distance, and distance gives control. Because when you see the tactic, you are no longer inside it. And this is where the most interesting part begins, and at the same time, the hardest part for most people. Because when you start noticing these things, when you begin realizing how often you are being influenced, even when you did not notice it before, something inside you changes. But that change does not always feel like strength or relief. Sometimes it feels like doubt, sometimes like confusion, and sometimes even like loss, because you begin to see how many moments in your life were not as yours as you thought, how many decisions were not shaped entirely by you, how many emotions were intensified or altered. And that realization can be uncomfortable because it forces you to re-examine not only situations, but also yourself within those situations. Because the truth is that influence does not simply change your actions, it changes the way you see yourself, the way you trust yourself, the way you interpret reality. And when that begins to change, it does not always immediately feel like something good. Sometimes it feels like you are losing control a little, without even noticing it. And this is where many people make a mistake. They either ignore it, or they go to the other extreme, start suspecting everyone, shut down, think that everyone is trying to manipulate them, but that is not awareness. That is fear, and fear does not give you control. It only changes the form of your reaction. Real awareness works differently. It is quieter, calmer. It is not about immediately drawing conclusions, but about noticing what is happening beneath the surface. And this is where your real power begins. Because once you clearly see these patterns even one time, they no longer work on you in the same way. Not because people stop using them, no. They remain everywhere. In conversations, in relationships, in social situations. But the difference is that now you see them in the process, not afterward. And that changes everything. Because now a pause appears between what is happening and your reaction, and that pause is control. Before, you reacted automatically, adjusted yourself without even thinking. Now you can stop and ask yourself, is this really my feeling, or am I being influenced right now? And that moment is the most powerful part of this entire process, because manipulation only works when it is invisible. When you do not question it, when you believe that everything you feel is completely your own. But the moment you begin becoming aware of it, it starts losing its power. And you do not need to fight it. You do not need to create conflict. You do not need to prove anything. Sometimes it is enough just to see it for it to stop working. And over time, something even more important happens. You begin trusting yourself again. Not blindly, but consciously. You begin noticing your reactions, your emotions, your thoughts, and understanding what is truly yours and what may have been shaped by influence. And that clarity forms gradually. But once it appears, it does not disappear. You stop chasing unstable approval. Stop overanalyzing the behavior of others. Stop changing yourself just to preserve comfort, and instead you begin staying in your own reality, in your own feelings, in your own position. And that is the difference between being under influence and being in control. It is not about controlling others. It is about control over yourself, over your thoughts, your emotions, your decisions, your attention. Because attention is the foundation of everything. Where your attention goes, your experience follows. And when you begin controlling where you direct it, everything changes. You become less reactive, less dependent on the reactions of others, less drawn into emotional swings, and more stable within yourself. And most importantly, you do not need proof to understand that something is wrong. You do not need someone to admit it or explain it. If something feels strange, if something creates confusion, if you begin doubting yourself more than usual, that is already enough. And the ability to trust that is real protection. Because the truth is very simple, but most people ignore it. Manipulation does not control strong people. It controls unaware people. And the moment awareness appears, even in a small amount, everything begins to change. Patterns break, influence weakens, and control returns to you. So if even a little of this made you pause for just a second, do not ignore it. Do not scroll past it. Do not tell yourself it is nothing, because that pause is the beginning of awareness. And when awareness begins, it grows. And when it grows, it changes everything. Because you no longer react blindly. You begin to see. And when you see clearly, no one will be able to quietly control you anymore.